Kia ora koutou. Thanks everyone for your 2-minute breather. We're going on to our next briefing of the day, which is just an analysis of the submissions that we've received for our consultation around Class 4 gambling and that policy review. And yeah, that's the one, eh? Yeah. So we'll get into that, and I'll hand that over to the staff. They can give us their presentation. We'll ask questions at the end. Try and hold questions till the end. Is that cool? So try and take a note of the page that we're on and go from there. Yes, it is on the hub.
Okay, kia ora koutou. Yep, so I was just going to run, I'm Leslie. Just going to run through just a high-level summary of our submission responses. Some of you were present at the hearing, so you got to hear some of what people had to say. Oops. Oh, wait, sorry. That's cool. Yep, so just reiterating with regard to the formal consultation, we ran that basically through September. We received 87 submissions that included quite long ones from some organisations. We heard, well, you guys heard 9 submitters. 9 submitters wanted to be heard, ended up with that 6 were heard specifically with regards to the gambling. And we have run this consultation with Smokefree, which I think was quite a positive thing. I think it resulted in both those policies getting a higher than normal submission response, so that was great. And so all the submissions have been made available in your LG Hub along with a more detailed analysis. So just going to quickly flick through the responses to the 4 main questions that we had with regards to the gambling. We had the pretty much strong same response to all 4 questions. So the first one around, do you agree that there should be no new consents for Class 4 venues was, sorry, can't you read that now? 77%. And so based on that, we're recommending that we progress with the thinking lid approach, which there's support for. And the second one, once again, 75% response this time, people agreeing that we should not consent any additional pokie machines in the district. So based on that, once again, we're also recommending to progress with the thinking lid approach. Oh, gosh, that got really excited, sorry. I'm not sure what happened. Oh, you need to go back a few. One more. Yeah, that one. Yeah, that's all right. Do you agree that there should be no new consents for Class 4 venues to relocate? Once again, over 70%, sitting at about 71%. And so, once again, looking to progress with the thinking lid approach. And then finally, do you agree that there should be no consents for standalone TAB venues? And that was 73%. Just as a reminder, we currently have no standalone TAB venues at the moment, so that's looking to retain that by thinking lid approach as well. So the key things from the feedback, strong themes 4 were concerns around the potential for harm, the level of harm, the type of harm, and how far that can stretch, not just beyond the problem gambler, but to other affected people. Concern around the high number of venues in areas of high deprivation and affecting the most vulnerable. Inequities in health outcomes between Māori and non-Māori. Although community grants can be seen as a benefit, they're also, in terms of the system, they're providing a transfer of funds from lower socioeconomic groups to higher socioeconomic groups. And just one quote here, accessibility should be restricted to minimise harm for the collective well-being of all peoples and communities, particularly Māori. So those that were against the whole thinking lid approach pretty much talk about it being too much regulation and that it's an individual choice, that there would be reducing amounts of money available for community grants and with no alternative similar sort of sources that would impact groups. Just highlighting gambling as an addiction and it's not affected by the number of pokie machines, and that problem gamblers may turn to unregulated online gambling where there are no benefits returned to local communities. So just wanted to highlight that one of the additional proposals that came through in the consultation was that we should also not permit venue mergers, and that's specific in the legislation to club mergers. So that's the likes of the RSA, Waikanae Charter, that type of thing. So when we initially drafted the policy, we did look to put in no mergers, and then we sort of thought, oh, that's inconsistent with the Act, was what the legal advice we had. But now it turns out that we are able to clearly state in the policy that we don't want to permit no club mergers if that is what we desire to do. So if we continue with the proposal of a sinking lid approach and we do it across every aspect with no new class venues, no additional machines, no relocations, no TRB venues, and we add no mergers of clubs, then we're having what is called a comprehensive sinking lid policy. And it's quoted here by, I think it was the Problem Gambling Foundation. This is to offer superior protection to those vulnerable to gambling harm and represents the most effective public health strategy for councils seeking to mitigate gambling-related harm in their communities. So before we talk about recommendations, just the bottom of that slide there, but basically just to highlight that we accept that this approach of having a sinking lid may have little impact on gambling harm in the short to medium term, but over the long term, even small reductions in the number of venues can reduce our community's exposure to Class 4 gambling and make it less likely for them to develop those habits and reduce harm at the source. So what we are recommending is that we progress with the sinking lid approach for TAB and Class 4 venues, as well as for additional machines and not allowing relocations. And also that we, prior to adoption, that we change the draft policy to include not allowing mergers and to have a comprehensive sinking lid policy. So, next step. So final amendments, if required, will be made to the policy and then be looking to come back for consideration and approval to adopt on the 14th of December. And any questions or comments on that proposed recommendation or approach?
Liz.
Yeah, look, I'd like to know what we're going to do in terms of mitigating the negative effects of the sinking lid policy, because they are real. So one is the reduction in money available for community grants. That is, I mean, it's not going to happen overnight, but over time that there'll be, I forget how much it was, but it was in the millions lost to our community. And so we need to have strategies in place now to replace that money. And the second is because, I mean, I have studied to a reasonable extent addictive behaviour, and I do know that people with addictions, if one avenue is closed off to them, they turn to another avenue, and that's online gambling or whatever. Mm-hmm. So what can we do in that space? Because that's the last thing we want to see is people in our community resorting to online gambling or some other form of addiction, because it doesn't go away. That need, that craving to do things that's driven by, internal stuff, and they just needs to find something that resolves that internal conflict. So I would certainly like to see some thought given to that in terms of what comes back to council about how we mitigate those things, and perhaps even get some independent professional advice from like the Problem Gambling Foundation just seems to be fairly one-eyed. They just want to shut down everything. But, there are professional experts, psychologists or whatever, who understand addiction, who may be able to advise on what the best strategy is, in particular for dealing with the problem gamblers.
So in response to those two parts, yes, a sinking lid just as much as a cap, I guess, will have over the long term a negative impact on the funding available. We are of the opinion that really is over the long term, but we can absolutely come back with it. I think there needs to be a strategy as a community for how we want to fund our community groups and assets if we are not going to be using Pokie funds to do that. And it's definitely a wider conversation. In terms of the addictions part, that's certainly something that I would suggest we could look at through our health strategy that's coming up. So it's, that kind of addiction support stuff is definitely sitting right in that camp, rather than what we can do through this specific policy. And the phasing of this coming first before the health strategy is just the way things have panned out. But this is quite a narrow tool. But those wider issues of gambling and addiction support is something that we should definitely be thinking about through the health strategy.
Okay. So just in terms of the community funding, the solution for replacing that funding is that's going to take a huge amount of time to build that up. So to me, the two need to go in parallel. While you're winding this one down, you've got to be slowly building the other one up, because it will take just as long, to replace that funding. So we kind of need to start thinking about it now. So I think, to me, there just needs to be some recommendations that we start that process of how can we build some long-term sustainability for funding for our community organisations.
I do wonder, Liz, whether there's an opportunity, it may be through the health strategy, or just as we're thinking about how our different strategies fit together, whether we need to talk to central government about the fact that in the pursuit of one thing, it has an impact on another, and how are they going to support the balance of that? And I'll just use an example. Smokefree, we're leaning into vaping because, if everybody vapes, they don't smoke, so yay, we've done it. But then we go, oh no, vaping's a problem for us now.
That's right.
So what are we going to do? And I feel like what you're putting on the table is the same thing.
Exactly.
Is that you're actually creating a hole in the community. So we can come back and think about actually what options do we have to actually invite a conversation about how do we support communities to do this, because we do want to achieve, I think, help for people who do have addictions and to address that solution. But at the same time, we don't want to make the community worse off. So we'll think about how we bring that back.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, look, I might be a little bit controversial, what I'm going to suggest next, but I was quite taken with the presentation around the relocation aspect of things and how that can be an issue with regards to even, i.e. moving things out of Otaki to go somewhere else is not doable. Is there any way that we could do a relocation policy that was like a one-way policy out of Otaki specific as such? I know it doesn't solve the sinking lid issue, but it does take the machines from a lower social area, if you like, to a, should we say, relatively higher social area potentially. Because that's one of the reasons why those machines are all in Otaki, is because if they do anything with them, they're gone. Yet if they can move them around the district as such, not going back into Otaki once they're gone, type scenario, look, it's just not moving the problem away, but it's not increasing the amount of machines in the area as such, but it is perhaps managing where they are a little bit more.
I guess our response to that would be that we've never actually had anyone ask to move out of Otaki as a site for gambling, so it is unlikely to have much of an effect in that sense. The relocations do allow, correct me if I'm wrong, Leslie, they do allow minor relocations. So one of the other issues that was raised during hearings was, what if our building falls down or burns down, what happens then? You can relocate within, basically, to next door or something along those lines. So there is some ability to deal with some things in that relocation policy, even when you have the no relocations position. But our view is that the sinking lid approach is still the best outcome. And yeah, just because we've never had that request from anyone to actually move out of Otaki into another region, it just doesn't feel like it's likely to actually encourage any actual change in that kind of.
But we
relationship.
appreciating what you're saying there. Why would anyone ask when it's just not doable? I mean, there's no point in asking because it's not doable. Yet what the indicator I got was from that conversation, if the ability was there to do it, that it would be considered.
So they can currently do that now. This is a change in the policy that would allow no relocation. So currently relocations are allowable, and so people could have over the last period of time asked to relocate, and that would have been something we could have considered and approved, but as I said,
That hasn't happened. Oh, okay. Well, that certainly wasn't pointed out.
Sure.
Okay, that's good. That's good to know in relation to that. So people are, so just from my end, just tying that one off, that you've been able to relocate machines to other areas. So like, just say for argument's sake, you owned a place in Old Taki and somewhere else, you could move the machines in a direction.
The venue, yeah.
Yep.
For the machines, yeah.
So that hasn't been taken up on in the past, although it was talked to that it could be something that's done, just hasn't been done up to now.
Yeah, the only scenario where it has happened, we've had clubs merge. So we had the Rosé move, merge with Club Vista, which is a different scenario. So, but other than that, we haven't had a.
Okay.
And the other thing also, I know the Gaming Trust did talk a lot about it, about that kind of scenario of relocating to a less deprived area. I think because Kapiti is a little bit different because we're not a city. You know, we're not. You know, wherever you move to, you're still close to residential area because of our hubs. And also, they've never provided an example of where that actually has happened, so which I was interested that they didn't.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah.
No, that clarifies that. Thank you very much.
So I just want to add that when we undertake our social needs assessment in the district, I think it would be really valuable to understand just around addiction, who is actually accessing machines where in our district. So I'm not discounting the comments about where our poker machines are placed, but I think we shouldn't assume that it's only people in Otaki that use poker machines in Otaki, and it's only people in Parapara Umu that use poker machines in Parapara Umu and live in. And so I think it would be good to understand just that the coverage and where people come from to use some of our machines, because whilst what we're doing is on the supply side, I think it would be really good to understand the demand and that spread a bit more in the district and the need that we actually have, which might add to the conversation in the space as we move forward, because I think Leslie and Ange have quite rightly pointed out that that the benefits are in the longer term that we're thinking about. There's those shorter term points that we aren't going to address through this policy.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation today. So I have to admit, my question was probably along a similar vein to Chris's. It was more about understanding, and I appreciate this presentation, and I don't know whether it's going to go into the full report about where the gambling machines are and what the breakdown of the survey results are by demographics and by location. So, for example, are the locations where the most gambling machines are, have they got the greatest desire for these machines to stay there or be removed, for example? But in saying that in relation to the demand, I don't quite know how you do that, how you measure that, but understanding.
Yeah, it was interesting from the survey results that the majority of people that responded to the survey were not impacted by gambling themselves at all. So they were kind of stating an opinion based on not have been impacted either way, and that would have been spread across the district. So I haven't got in front of me the stats of where people were from that replied. When you talk about people using machines as well and where they come from when they go to do that, obviously with problem gamblers where they do have the the monitoring at the venues, which is part of the compliance through DIA. If they're a problem gambler, and this has been kind of taught to me by people generally, is that then they might spend the 2 hours at one venue, then they'll go to the next one, then they'll go up the road to Otaki for 2 hours, then they'll go to wherever for 2 hours. So they'll be gambling all day, but they'll move around in one day so that they're not being, breaking the rules, so to speak, at one venue.
Yeah.
So it's hard to kind of talk about demand from a
Yes.
in that perspective. I think it's very difficult to find those statistics.
Yeah.
We do have, the DIA did release to me for the purposes of the analysis exactly how much money is spent at each venue. That can't be publicly shared just because of for safety reasons. But yeah, I mean that. Yeah, it's indicative of sort of what the kind of problem areas are in that
Yeah.
regard.
Yeah, so further to that, I know that one of the submissions, or maybe two of the submissions, were saying that if you actually close these down or have a sinking lid policy, you're going to force people to gamble online. And I don't know whether there's any data for this, for this district at all that is available. Whether it's actually a much bigger problem online or whether it's actually in physical locations.
Yeah, well, there is still the DAA is still doing a lot of work around gathering statistics on online gambling, and I understand they're doing a bit more of a focus on that now and in the short term. The thing with that's always been kind of researched and communicated with regards to the pokies is that they are the most harmful form of gambling currently, well, out of the main 4 types of gambling that we know of, that sort of because of the physical attributes and so on and their availability. But there's probably not enough research so far about the online stuff. But DAA are also, one of the feedback that came through is that I think the DAA are working on looking to regulate online gambling if they can as well. So there are some things happening in that area.
Yeah, I mean, I just would note that Sky City Casino is now online. So they offer online pokies and other gambling forms now. And you have even Lotto. Lotto was online.
Yeah.
And so I think that the challenge will be in the demand space of understanding online spend is it won't be possible to get a per person information about how much they spend or whether it's more online or less, or I feel like that's going to be a bigger piece of work. So when I talked about the social needs assessment here, I wasn't imagining we're going to be able to tell you that, because I think there's going to have to be a far more in-depth, possibly nationally based piece of work on that, because I think that's extensive. And I mean, with Sky City going online, I think it's going to be quite interesting, because I think that's quite recent that they've gone online. I think that's post-COVID. I think that's happened. And yeah, I mean, you can obviously access Australian casinos if you wanted to. This policy isn't trying to address those issues. Obviously, we're trying to say in our backyard, this is what we can do. And unfortunately, there are other mechanisms that could be causing harm. So, but if we understood at least the people in our district who do have challenges, I think that was the bit the other side of it that we were interested in.
Yeah, one of the challenges of this, the scope of this is really narrow. So obviously what we can do here at Council is part of a much wider system that looks at gambling and impacts of gambling and how that's regulated and the assistance that's provided to problem gamblers. So we can only, in our policy, we can only focus on this one lever that we legislatively have to pull. We can talk more widely about how we might want to support addiction services in our district as part of our health strategy and other things, but in terms of the scope of the policy itself, it's really narrow as to what we can actually do with this one.
Yeah. Just in a lot of the focus on this was on addiction, and I thought it was hilarious that one of the gaming machine guy said, that the problems with the addicts, not with the machines. It's a bit like saying, it's the heroin addict, not the heroin. Or in America, they do the same argument with guns, right? But it does strike me that I remember being around at the time when the tobacco advertising was coming off, and everybody went, "Oh my God, that's it! Sport's going to collapse. The sky's falling, and all the rest of it." And that didn't happen actually. Some of the national sports organisations were a bit slow to adapt. The government provided a fund that kind of segued them into other things, and it carried on fine, right? And the other thing is, you can have a sinking lid policy, but it's not a particularly aggressive. It's not an aggressive one. So it's not like all of this is just going to disappear tomorrow, right? It's not. It's going to keep going. The bit I would be getting stuck into these blood-sucking parasites is that the amount that goes back into the community is an appallingly low amount for what comes out of the community plus the social costs. And problem gambling isn't just for addicts. Problem gambling is for anybody who loses more money than they can afford to lose. It doesn't have to be, and the whole problem with the poker machines is poker machines are designed for Lawrence, who doesn't look like a gambler, to go into the pub and get...
Have you got a question here somewhere?
Yeah, and get driven by
Nigel,
the machinery
rather than
and
picking
the
on me?
lights
No,
and,
no, just
you know,
joking.
the machines and the lights and all the rest of it. And suddenly, next thing you know, your pockets are empty and you think, shit, how did that happen? Well, that's what they're designed to do. It's not just for addicts. In fact, they would go broke if it was just for addicts because they run out of money. Right? Yeah. Well, actually,
So does McDonald's.
the note I made was that it's for
Smell
problem
it,
shoppers. It's the same
fried
thing.
chicken.
So people have got problems. They've got problems. So sometimes it is the machinery. It's the nature of nature of those machines. But we need to assist organisations and Liz is probably across this better than anybody else. But there's probably a list somewhere of organisations in Kapiti who receive money regularly from these poker machines. So what is the breakdown of that? And
The submitters gave that information as well.
yeah,
So they provided us
Yeah.
with the details of how much money we would lose and what organisations would not get
and
any.
whether or not we could assist in the process of them transitioning to another form of
I
funding.
mean, there's an opportunity. I mean, obviously not through this policy. So, to Angela and Leslie's earlier points, the focus of this policy and the scope of it is this. In terms of the wider work we do, there's an opportunity to, of course, write to DIA and other parts of government and to talk about where the benefit of the proceeds could most valuably be used. Some of the money is allocated to addiction itself, and so I feel like, you know, this is a quid pro quo here is where is the best use of that money, a local sports team or helping someone with an addiction with their addiction. So
The thing is, it is still largely parasitic. Whereas if you take the racing industry, for instance, the racing industry employs a huge number of people. Like a lot of people are employed by it. The gaming industry doesn't employ many people at all. You put the machine in, and then it skins people. Simple. Doesn't employ many people. And as far as Sky City is concerned, well, that's repatriating a significant amount of profit back to Australia, where the owners are.
this has got, well, I'm just going to say, I do think there are some social implications. This is going to sound odd, but if you talk to a pub that has pokies in it, they will say sometimes that the difference between them making it through the week or not is the take they get from the pokie machines. And I'm not saying that's the right thing, but that is true. And if you do go up to somewhere like Sky City, there are a bunch of older people who go there for free coffee and company, and it's warm, and you don't have to pay for power. So there's, and I'm not saying that's the right reason, but I feel like it's a complex issue. And not
Very
to do with our
complex.
policy, because obviously our policy is this big, but I hear the intention and the focus on harm.
Thanks, Shelley.
My question is, do we have any statistics on the proportion of problem gamblers as opposed to the proportion of people who just have a bit of fun? And that's what we've got to keep in mind as well, is there's a lot of people who just like to put $20 in and have a little bit of fun, and we're going to abolish them all because, you know, instead of actually that's a place where people can be identified, and you can't be identified when you're doing it online at home. So
Yep. So there is some information in the submissions that give you the percentages of problem gamblers out of the total number of gamblers.
So 1.6% of gamblers are problem or moderate gamblers. However, of the people who seek help for gambling, 50% of those are as a result of class 4 gambling in particular. So while the overall, when you look at, so that 1.6% is for all types of gambling. So that includes, you know, everyone who plays lotto and all of those things. But of the people who seek help for gambling, half of them come from people who use class 4 machines, which is why that real sense of harm is there for those particular types.
And is it? Yeah, is it fair that 50% also includes recidivist people coming back for help again and again, right?
I was just going to say, with that 1.6% statistic, thing to remember also is that for those are the actual gamblers themselves. For each of those people, there's another 5 to 10 people affected by that person's gambling. So that brings up the numbers a lot more on you.
Are you meaning their families?
Yeah.
Right.
The wider social impact of
The
the
way,
gambling.
and that's the point we were talking about before. Yeah. I guess that is the dilemma that's on the table, and the issue that's been considered more broadly nationally is your point, Shelley, about you've just, well, didn't see cancel culture, but that 1.6% doesn't seem a lot, and until you start to say where is it and who is it, and then is it the most vulnerable people who have been impacted the most, and so then there's potentially equity and equality considerations that we might want to think about our role and wanting to support addressing some of those things.
You know, the initial argument for poker machines was that they were providing, that they were an entertainment source. So prior to, ask yourself, what was in pubs prior to poker machines?
Cigarettes.
No, they used to have, you know, they had pinball machines.
Ah.
So there was stuff in there. It wasn't about entertainment, it was about income. Get the income.
Well, get people in there to buy the alcohol. Kathy,
Thank you. We're just talking about 87 submissions here, aren't we, out of our whole district? And so I don't want to be dictated to by a small minority of our communities. But I just wanted to say, this isn't online, is it? I just
Yes.
wanted to say, is it? Oh, well.
So Parasite's line's gone out live, didn't it?
you might not have had the microphone on at the time.
I mean, and you know, one of my questions was, you know, how do you find an addiction? I have a cousin who lives locally, and she's in her late 80s, and she goes down to, you know, the Coffee Club every Friday afternoon with their friends, and they have a really good time. They're not addicted to gambling, and now you're talking about a sinking lid problem. So it's kind of issue. It's like you'll send it underground, and it's been underground before. And people will do other things if they cannot gamble or drink.
What are the 87-year-olds going to do?
I mean, it's, yeah, and I mean, my granddaughter just won 10 grand at Sky City, and she stopped betting on it now because she won the money, so she doesn't want to spend it all back, does she? But yeah, what was I going to say? Yeah, not everybody, but there's only 1.6%. So it's kind of like, you know, and I grew up in a family of gamblers and things, and I enjoy the TAB. And if you start doing things online, I'm going to get a bit toey, because people will do other things. You know, you just won't stop gambling, smoking and drinking and whatever else, and not do anything.
That's right. We need an indoor sports and recreation centre.
Absolutely, we do.
That'll stop people
but
gambling.
What I'm saying is, it'll go underground. So
TAB's online.
I know that's what I do.
It's all online.
I know I do that now. Thank you.
I think
Yes.
the thing to remember for this policy is that even though it's a sinking lid, we aren't forcing anyone to close their venues. We aren't forcing anyone to give up their machines. It's all based on the individual businesses deciding basically voluntary attrition rates, right? So it's only if venues decide that they no longer want to operate that anything is actually going to change and things will close.
Yeah, but it's like the creepy thing, isn't it? Because now you're talking about mergers. So, you know, why would you do that? So if one club had the machines and another club had them and they merged into them, you wouldn't take those machines away though, would you?
Well, the merger means that you wouldn't be able to combine those things. Currently, you are able to merge two venues, but there is an upper limit on the number of machines they can have. So in some instances, you could have two venues merged, but you would still have to reduce the number of machines. You can't have any more than 30 within the merged venue. So you might still see a reduction in the number of machines. It's still quite a large number of machines for a single venue.
Quite noisy.
Yeah, but yeah. So I guess I appreciate it's a long game though, and part of the reason why we recommend this is because by reducing the number of venues, we're reducing the exposure for new gamblers. It's less about the people who are currently gambling, and it's unlikely that they are going to face much of a change realistically in their ability to access machines over the next however many years. But the idea is that there will be fewer people who are going into venues that have class 4 gambling, and therefore they don't pick up the habit, which can turn into a problem for them in their community. So that is kind of the long game that we're playing, but I think I wouldn't put too much concern about, what people are going to do next week when they want to go down to the pokies. That is not going to change for them in the near future unless their venue voluntarily decides to close. That's the limit of the policy that we have.
So what we're trying to do is control people's lives so they don't gamble.
I think in the short term, I think Angela's saying in the short term, Kathy, you will possibly experience no impact from this, but we are and we are talking about growth in New Zealand, and so what we're saying is over time, I'll put in a time frame on it, a made up one, over the next 30 years, assuming there is change, then we would say per gambler, I'm going to say not capita, because that really warps the figures slightly, but at the pure gambling population, yeah, you will over time see a reduction in availability, but it will be slow like the Titanic rather than being on a quick speedboat that you see change, yeah, because I think that's what you were saying.
Yeah.
So next week, next year, and the next decade possibly, you will see very little impact, but in 30 years, you will feel that as it starts to do that.
Okay, but what I'm saying is you'll just send it underground. That's all. So that's all I'm.
Yeah, that argument has a couple of pitfalls because there's a few issues here that I'll raise. One is if we have a small earthquake and the hotel at the Jolly Miller or in fact Otaki gets structurally mangled and they want to move into a nice fit for purpose small brand new facility, they can't, right? If they have a partial fire and go, the hotel in Otaki that is a little bit old and was built 70 years ago, if they want to move into a fit for purpose, a better facility, that they can't do that.
They are able to relocate within a short distance from their current location. So they would be able to, I'm not sure exactly what the meters is of that. But
Yeah, so at the moment, if with the DA, you have to apply to the DAA if you want to move nearby. There is going through actually High Court at the moment as to whether that it's on a case-by-case basis and it may change. But I guess what we're saying here is with relocation not allowing them, we're actually seeing it as making the opportunity for venues not to relocate and thereby reducing them. So if someone wants to relocate and we say no, we're going to lose that venue through that means.
Yep.
So it is seen as a harm minimisation tool in terms of the policy. But yeah, I know what you're saying, but yeah.
And I just want to know if there was a massive earthquake and buildings were not usable, we would have more issues than the poker machines because a district plan would not hold possibly. We'd be redoing a whole bunch of things in this district.
Yeah, I'm not talking about a O'Hara North fault or a Hikurangi sub-Dutchin fault. I'm talking, even little wobble, some of those buildings are going to be not fit, but they're going to be ready to stick it. We're going to ready to stick them.
So you're saying on a case-by-case basis, it may be that someone's impacted and then what?
Yeah, and these places do provide employment. They do provide community. There's a lot of positives out of pubs and hotels and clubs. The other thing I'd say is, correct me if I'm wrong, at 1.6%, if we've got 1,000 gamblers in our rohi, which you may have more, we may have, let's call it 2,000 gamblers, we're talking about 20 people who have got gambling issues. And we're going to put, maybe not tomorrow, maybe in 5 years or 10 years' time, potentially going to put livelihoods and communities, in some of our more rural areas, like Otaki, like the Jolly Miller, it is a little bit of the hub of the community as well, more so in our rural areas. So I think...
I just want to remind you that we currently have these policies in place. So we are reviewing them. So some of these restrictions exist now, and all we're asking you is whether you want to make a slight tweak to it. So on the table was not to remove it. We're by law required once one is in place to review it. and then say, do you want to make these tweaks or not? So you can say no, you want to leave it as it is, or you can say actually based off the feedback of the 87 people who did respond and come and talk to you on both sides of the argument, that you do want to switch slightly. That overall impact in the short and medium term is, I've got a biro and I just put a dot on a piece of paper for now, but you still have it anyway. So you've got those restrictions in place now. So I just want to be clear, you actually aren't putting massive restrictions in, they exist.
Yeah, but the one where the hotels can't merge is a pretty big one.
Yeah, that is a
Because
change.
to those hotels, and I'll use Otaki again, I don't want to keep using Otaki, but they've got hotels that are close together.
Yeah.
If they want to merge into one nice premises, instead of having two older premises, I haven't been to a pub in Otaki for years, so they might already be really nice, they can't.
Just to clarify a point there, with the mergers, it only applies to clubs, not to venues. So it's not about pubs can't merge and
So
bring
pubs
them.
can merge?
No, they can't under
can't.
the Gambling Act legislation. It's only clubs, so like the RSAs. We've only got 3 clubs in the district, and so it's only the clubs that can do the merging thing. And I was just going to note,
So that would have no effect then.
in terms of the number of gamblers, it's actually 70% of people are gamblers according to the National Health and Lifestyle Survey across all forms of gambling. So, in Kapiti, that you're talking about tens of thousands of people that gamble in some form or another.
Yeah, so I buy lotto once it gets over 6 million, I'd be classed as a gambler.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah. But obviously, there's some people that gamble a lot more than others.
Question, is it, so just to be clear, is it the venue or the business that holds the license for it?
Yeah, so the venue applies to the DAA for a license to operate, but they also have to have the consent from council, to territorial authority consent. So they won't get a license without consent from the council. So.
But is it
It's the venue, not the.
So the venue. So
not the
if
business.
let's say a venue has a license and the business that was there at the time closes down,
Yep.
and another business comes later on and opens there, can they continue and put the machines back?
I think there's a rule around I think it's a rule around 6 months. I can't remember off the top of my head because it's around also the DAA licensing. I mean, under our policy in that scenario, we wouldn't be allowing any new consent. So, but if they close down and reopen, I think it's within 6 months. But if it's been more than 6, I can't remember. Sorry, what
so
the rules
there's a
are.
limit to it, but they could within a certain amount of time.
Not under this policy. I mean, if anything's going to close down under this policy, we're not going to allow a new consent. I mean, the business can open up, they just can't have poker machines. That's what we're saying. Yeah, nothing to stop them from having a new venue. And obviously, pretty much all poker venues, any class 4 gambling venue, that has to be not the main activity. The main activity has to be something else. So venue has to be like a pub and serve alcohol or food or whatever. That's got to be their main business. And the class 4 gaming has to be secondary or to that. Yeah.
Jocelyn.
Sorry, I didn't realise my light was on. I was just going to ask, don't we have to deal with a smoke-free policy this afternoon as well?
Yes, we do. That'll come shortly.
When this comes to council, so will you present it as a pick A or pick B, or will you be making a recommendation for us to tweak it? Or will you say, leave it as status quo, or tweak it to have a shrinking policy?
Yeah. So when I came to council on a briefing a few months ago, presented the options then around what we're looking at and talked through that, and the strong indication I got at the time was that that councillors wanted a sinking-lid approach. So that's what we progressed in recommending through our consultation. We presented 3 options and said we're looking at the sinking-lid approach. So the plan is to go when we come to adoption is to recommend a sinking-lid approach unless there's
Sorry, I was just going to add to that. When we come to you with the final policy, we have to have a draft policy for you to either approve or not approve. So as part of that, we have to draft it on the basis of the feedback that we've had from you guys to date. as Leslie said, so far that has been for a sinking lid, but noting there's a bunch of debate going on today. But we will need to, we need to draft it on a basis for you to either accept or reject the draft policy that we'll bring to you.
I just want to note that generally we'd be basing that off the evidence that's come through from the submissions and hearing that we've undertaken as a council. You have the option to accept or reject that essentially, and if you reject it, we'll have to come back round.
It's not net loss to the economy. Any money that doesn't go to the poker machines goes to buy groceries or whatever. Because for the most part, people are
Okay,
money.
cool. I think we've done quite a bit of debating in this, and it is actually a briefing. So we've still got our smoke-free policy to have a look at. So let's move on to smoke-free.
Thanks, Leslie.
Thank you, Leslie. Appreciate that. And we started this, just a reminder, we did start this half an hour late at 4 o'clock. We have another 10 minutes, 12 minutes until our allocated time for this briefing is up. So let's go through this briefing, and when it comes to questions, let's keep them to questions. We're not going to debate anything.
Oh, good. So, so we've just been consulting on our smoke-free policy. We were considering two options for change for this from our existing smoke-free policy. One was to include vaping alongside smoking in all of the areas that we prohibit smoking, and the second was to broaden the areas that we currently cover. At the moment, the policy just talks about parks and playgrounds, and we are proposing to add in all parks, reserves and sport grounds, all playgrounds including skate parks, within 10 metres of outdoor public areas around council buildings and facilities, so that includes like our pools and things, train stations, bus stops and shelters, beaches, rivers and lakes, outdoor dining on public land, which would come from 2025, and it would be because you have to get a council permit to have outdoor dining, so we have some ability to control what happens there. And the last one is events held on council land or receiving council funding for that event, which again we have some control over because we are giving the money to them. All of those things would bring us broadly in line with the rest of the Wellington region in terms of what they currently have for their smoke-free policies. There you go, nice and quick. 87 submissions on this one, and only 3 submitters spoke at the hearings on the 19th. So in terms of the results, most people were in favour of including vaping in our policy at about 75%. We had some, in terms of the feedback we got, a lot of the commentary was around that it should be treated the same as smoking, and mentioning the current issues of vaping amongst our young people. Feedback against it was similar to the gambling one, was council overstepping their authority, and that vaping doesn't smell as bad as smoking. So we are currently recommending that we do proceed with including vaping in our proposed policy. We also, as I said, look to broaden out our areas. Based on the feedback we had, most of the respondents did support that. And I'll just bring up the... oh, it's not there. I thought I had a nice graph, but I don't. There we go. I just want to note one issue. We did have an issue with our survey at the outset, which was that you couldn't initially, it had the little tick boxes, and you couldn't tick none of them. So we did have 2 people write comments saying, I wanted to say I didn't want to tick any and you made me tick one. We fixed the form and we corrected their responses. So and we're reasonably confident that that hasn't overall impacted the quality of the results we've had. Most people had selected multiple options to say that they supported it in all of those places, which isn't something you would do if you were forced to just tick one to proceed with the survey. So some of the feedback was it sets a better example, and it sort of safeguards health and wellbeing from people being exposed to passive smoking. Some of the feedback against it was it's difficult to enforce, which is something we acknowledged, and as a educational policy isn't something that we intend to actually enforce in a in any kind of meaningful way, and that we need to take a common sense approach, which I suspect is along the same lines of overstepping council's boundaries. We will come back to you on the 14th of December alongside the gambling one with a draft policy for your consideration and seeking your approval on the basis of those recommendations that we just talked about. And that's it.
Thank you. Jocelyn.
Thank you. So I've got a few questions. The first question is that I know that, as was mentioned, we had three people come along to submit. Two of those organisations that came along, they requested in their submissions that council buildings weren't leased to vape shops. I don't see that included in this. Can that be included, please, is my question.
That in particular is outside the scope of this policy, so that would be an internal policy about our basically how we manage our property portfolio, and it doesn't fit within the scope of the kind of external facing policy that we're looking at here, would be my answer.
Yeah, I agree. So unfortunately, it would be to do with our internal policy on premises that we rent. This policy is talking about district-wide policy, and even though we have commented that we won't allow smoking within X metres of our premises, that doesn't mean that somebody couldn't rent a building and sell that in the building at this stage. We can come back on that, Jocelyn. It's just not covered in this policy.
Okay.
So maybe it's we can take an action to come back to you to talk about that.
Yes. So you say it's an internal policy. So that is one that I can't remember seeing such a policy come before us. Is that one that's not actually signed off by councillors, or is that an internal policy?
It's not that we necessarily have one at the moment. It would just be a matter that would be dealt with through one. So either we would create one, or we would see if there was one that we could adapt to use it.
You could. I was just going to say, I actually think it's something that I can take back to Darren and say that was raised today, and we can come back to you on. It just won't be in this policy.
Yeah, so I think the reason I've raised that is because, two quite serious submitters raised that matter.
Yeah.
Can I just interrupt there? Would it be possible, as part of when this paper comes to council, that we add a recommendation that staff look at our policy in regards to leasing of publicly owned properties?
We might be able to come back to you on that paper and say you've asked a specific question, although it sits outside this policy, we're coming back to you on it.
Okay.
And then we can manage it that way, because otherwise there might be some information we need to give you about it, and I think we can do that homework and come back to you.
Thank you.
So we'll do that.
Thank you. So my second question, so in terms of vaping and the issuing of vaping licences and setting up vaping shops, so that's all managed by the Ministry of Health, is it?
Yes.
And so what can this council do to manage that? I use the word manage that.
Very little, to be honest. So the location, so where vaping shops are able to, or tobacco retailers are able to open, is governed by national legislation. They've recently brought in those changes around vaping, but there is no real ability for us to do anything at a local level beyond that. The only sort of possible route, which I'm not even sure is particularly plausible, is through how you might zone things in the district plan to be able to have commercial activities, but that's really blunt. You can't just single out vaping or tobacco stores. It would have to be, broadly where you accept to have commercial activity. So it's we don't have tools at our disposal to be able to issue licences or deny licences to people who are operating in any areas in our district.
I think in our health strategy, this would be perhaps an advocacy item. So actually, the Public Health Service was saying to us that they are actually open to pushing some of the legislative settings and policies but they don't make the decisions on that. Obviously, ministers do. And as councillors, I feel that you could definitely lobby central government ministers and say, actually, you haven't gone far enough. And I think one thing we should remember is currently the government has been using vaping as a tool to reduce smoking with the, Smoke-Free New Zealand goal that's in place. That was actually one of the levers to stop people smoking. So vaping doesn't count in their target.
Yeah. So thank you. And so just one more question. So we have a psychoactive substances policy for legal highs. So I assume that vaping is cannot, because I think when we landed that policy, vaping wasn't a thing. I take it vaping is not included in
Vaping
this.
won't meet the definition of a psychoactive substance to let us regulate it through that.
Because nicotine doesn't count. Well, obviously it is a drug, but not that meets that requirement.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Just to follow on from Jocelyn, just to follow on from Jocelyn, so there's a specific instance where there's a vape store to open in Waikanae. Now, it's within 300 metres of a marae. It's about 210 metres from a marae. My understanding is that the legislation says you can't have a vape store within 300 metres of a marae or a school. So we presumably still do have it's not our policy, we don't determine the policy, but surely it's our role to regulate it or to enforce that?
So we wouldn't be the enforcement agency, but I guess we could report that. What I just need to check with the legislation around that 300 metres and exactly when that is or has come into effect. So it might be that they have somehow, it hasn't quite come into effect yet. I'm not quite sure. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
So we can follow up on that.
Yeah.
And there's a regulatory element to this.
It's a matter of
So
quite
we might pass it
significant
on to
concern in
the
the community.
regulatory team, and they might be able to follow up on that. And if we believe there is I'll say breach, that we can follow up with the enforcement entity, and they can do something about
And the
it.
thing is, it's just very, very close down the road from the gas station that's got a vape store in it. So, from the front gate of the marae. Yeah. I'm also not sure if it's as the crow flies or if it's. But either which way, it's really close.
But again, it might be it's an issue to do with the policy settings.
Yeah.
That if you're going to write to ministers, you may want to address that issue.
Yeah.
Because if you see how close those things are and the current requirements enable that, then clearly there's an issue.
They must. Surely they must be relying on councils for enforcement. You would think.
No.
Go for it, Martin.
Two quick points of clarity, more than anything else. The legislation that's coming in with regards to minimising the amount of places you can buy tobacco.
Yes.
Say, for argument's sake, I'm picking that doesn't, vape's not tied to that.
No, there's no limit in the same way as they've put for tobacco. It's only the proximity requirement for vape stores.
And it's got nothing to do with nicotine content or anything like that?
No, because the focus is smoke-free NZ, that's the goal.
Yep.
And so vaping is not smoking, despite what's in it. So it's not to do with nicotine, it's to do with smoke harm that the focus is on.
So what we need to be doing is pushing vaping back to prescription format, because fundamentally you could say it served its purpose in the first instance with regards to now it's being used as a tool to actually increase smoking.
And I
That would be argument.
understand that's the approach that Australia's taken, is that it's
that's cool.
prescription.
Next question was the lakes, beaches.
Hold up,
and-
guys. Come on, we
Hey,
haven't
guys.
finished yet.
Yeah, I keep it shut for you
Martin's-
guys, eh? The rivers, beaches and lakes part of this. Do other areas have already put that in place, have they? I was surprised that we were able to regulate those areas.
So yes, they are included in some of the policies in the region, but not all. And again, given that it's a education policy rather than one that we're going to strictly enforce, it's more about we would have on our signage that we already have in beaches or by rivers, that it would also include a no smoking, no vaping sign on that as well. But it's not something that we would have enforcement officers out patrolling.
Oh, good, thank you.
Yeah, to ride on my mobility scooter.
Okay, Kathy.
I'm just wondering, where does the beach end and where does the beach start? And where does the beach start from? We're looking at McLean Park.
I mean, to be honest, I'm not sure I have a better answer than that. But I think, given that it's an educational policy, again, I suspect it would be people who are standing on the sand or generally close to it. In terms of that, yeah, yeah, as the official term. But in terms of an educational policy, which we're not going to enforce, the exact definition of what is a beach becomes less relevant. Yeah.
Okay, that was all.
Great. Okay, I think we're done. We're erupted into slightly out of control. It's been a very long day, so thank you, team. I appreciate all your attention today. Thank you, Angela and Chris and Leslie, who has left the room, and Hara, who is the other GM who stuck it out, and Kate.